Question for you. The greatest threat to America, and for the future generations of the world for that matter, is not terrorism, nuclear war, or even pandemic diseases. No, it's a much scarier scenario.
No challenge poses a greater threat to future generations than climate change.
Time for some real talk with Chris Plante, the host of The Chris Plante Show, and Leslie Marshall, the host of The Leslie Marshall Show and Fox News contributor. Chris, that is the greatest threat. When I heard that last night, I had to readjust the volume on my television set because I don't care how many reports have come out, and climate change, obviously something that we might need to be paying attention to. But the biggest threat for my children is going to be climate change just after the Paris attacks, Australia, Canada, etc.
Yeah, it's like you're tied to the train tracks and there's a train coming and you're worried that that spot on your hand might be cancer. You know, it's kind of a slow burner. If, the worst case scenario is that generations from now it could be an issue, and that the president pretends that by crushing our energy sector here, he's going to slow the rise of the oceans and change the climate, while China will begin talking about it in 15 years and the rest of the world is effectively ignoring it. It's absurd. I mean, it really is sort of the theater of the absurd.
Leslie, I mean, do you agree with the president that the greatest challenge facing our next generation is climate change?
No, I don't. And I don't think that the world does. Of course, we agree on one thing today, maybe not the cancer analogy, but I definitely do think this is something that will affect future generations. But it is a great threat. One of. All they had to do is put one of. The greatest threat, in my opinion, I think many people worldwide, is terrorism and the threat to our freedoms and peace.
He didn't put in one of the great. It was obvious that he said the greatest threat. And I think, Chris, that maybe people wouldn't be as upset about that if he had actually called terrorism what it is and actually might have said Al-Qaeda in the speech somewhere as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, getting his priorities in order would be a nice change of pace, but they refuse resolutely to define radical Islamic terrorism as radical Islamic terrorism.
Yep.
And look, Leslie, I'm glad to hear you say that, and you're a reasonable and sensible and intelligent person. But if you look at the polls, Democrats are horribly concerned about the weather. They're terrified of the weather.
And I don't want to debate totally climate change and whether or not it's true or anything like that. I was just questioning you about whether it's the one most important thing. All right, I want to move on to the State of the Union response by Joni Ernst, freshman senator from Iowa. And check out her shoes. She wore camo heels. It's a side note. It's a footnote, no pun intended. Leslie, how'd she do?
Actually, I liked her opening. I must be honest. I liked that she was respectful of the president. We heard what the president had to say, and we thank you for him sharing that. And then she went on to outline what the Republican response was. I too wore plastic bags over my shoes, although I had more than one pair as a kid with rain when I didn't have galoshes or rubbers, as they called them back in the day when dinosaurs roamed the earth. But I have to say that as a Democrat, what I'd like to see come forth from that is more policy proposals and legislation that would help the middle class, and I just didn't hear that in her and the Republican response.
All right, she only had 7 minutes. Chris, how'd she do?
I think she did very well. I mean, she's brand spanking new to Washington, D.C., to the Senate. I think there was a lot of pressure on her. The spotlight was on her. Honestly, I think she had a minor case of the nerves for a few seconds off the top. But honestly, I think she did great. She's got Bobby Jindal with his, looking like he was being held hostage, and then Marco Rubio with the water gate issue, reaching out for the water.
Well, and this is why I think you can't win. This is why I think you can't win in that whole setup, and I'm going to talk about that right now. Chris, Leslie, thank you so much.
Thanks.